If 1970 was the threshold, 1971 was the year the door swung wide open. It was a year where the genre felt truly unhinged, shifting away from the polished studio productions of the previous decade and into something more visceral, experimental, and psychedelic. The horror of 1971 didn't just want to tell a story, it wanted to alter your state of mind. Tonight we're digging back into the archive for 10 more overlooked titles from 1971. This was a moment in time where high art aesthetics met low budget grit. It was the peak of the European sleaze explosion, the rise of the psychological slow burn, and the beginning of the nature strikes back cycle that would soon dominate the decade. These films are messy, stylish, and deeply atmospheric while capturing a genre in the middle of a radical identity crisis. From the dreamlike fog of the Connecticut countryside to the neon-soaked streets of Rome, these are 10 more overlooked gems from 1971.
Malpertuis, 1971. Jan, a young man, is lured back to the decaying estate of his uncle, the enigmatic Casavius. He finds himself trapped within the walls of Malpertuis, a labyrinthine mansion filled with a collection of bizarre, beautiful, and deeply unsettled residents. The condition of the inheritance is simple. Stay, and you share in the wealth. Leave, and you lose everything. But John soon realizes that Malpertuis is no ordinary estate. The inhabitants are not merely eccentric relatives. They are the Greek gods themselves, stripped of their divinity, shackled in mortal flesh, and slowly withering away as they serve out a sentence designed by the dying Casavius. Director Harry Kummel crafts a film that functions like a waking nightmare. Orson Welles dominates the screen as the decrepit, megalomaniacal Casavius, turning his deathbed into a stage for his final, cruel performance. The film refuses to follow the rules of a traditional mystery. Instead, it unfolds with the logic of a surrealist painting, where corridors shift, shadows pulse with life, and the boundary between humanity and divinity begins to erode. Visually, Malpertuis is a masterpiece of art house horror. Kummel uses the mansion as a character, an impossible non-Euclidean space that feels as if it were constructed out of memories and ancient fears. The violence is sparse but jarring, serving as a reminder that when a god dies in a human body, it is a grotesque, singular event. It isn't interested in jump scares or tidy conclusions. It wants to pull you into its claustrophobic, mythic density. This is a film that demands total submission to its dream logic. It's an intellectual puzzle and a visual feast that bridges the gap between classic literature and experimental European cinema. For the viewer looking for something beyond the standard slasher or creature feature, Malpertuis is a rare, haunting experience. A film about the death of wonder, the cruelty of obsession, and the weight of forgotten gods. The Werewolf vs. the Vampire Woman, 1971. Paul Naschy's The Werewolf vs. the Vampire Woman, or La Noche de Walpurgis, is arguably the crown jewel of Spanish horror cinema from the 1970s. It features Naschy himself as Waldemar Daninsky, his iconic, tragic werewolf persona who spends the film desperately seeking a cure for his lycanthropy. The plot finds him crossing paths with the resurrected Countess Wandessa, a malevolent vampire who seeks to drain the life force of innocent villagers. It is a collision of two classic monsters that feels less like a gimmick and more like an operatic, Gothic tragedy. What elevates this film above standard creature feature fare is the sheer, unpretentious sincerity with which it is made. Director Leon Klimovsky crafts a landscape of fog-drenched forests and crumbling ruins that feels genuinely plucked from the pages of a 19th-century penny dreadful. Naschy brings a wounded, soulful weariness to Daninsky that remains the standout performance of his career. He isn't just a monster, he is a man trapped by his own blood, and his yearning for peace provides the film with its unexpected emotional core. While it is undeniably a product of the exploitation boom, featuring the expected levels of gore and nudity, there is an artistry here that is hard to ignore. The film is beautifully shot, emphasizing the contrast between the lush, romanticized horror of the past and the visceral violence of the modern era. It's a quintessential example of the Euro horror aesthetic, a mix of high-concept pulp and somber folkloric dread. For anyone interested in the legacy of the werewolf myth or the colorful history of Spanish genre film, this is an absolutely mandatory viewing experience. The Case of the Scorpion's Tail, 1971. After a deadly plane explosion, a widow travels abroad to claim a large insurance payout. Before she can collect, she's killed. And suddenly, everyone connected to the policy becomes a potential target. An investigator and a reporter follow the money trail across multiple countries, uncovering hidden relationships and competing claims. Each new lead creates another suspect and another risk. This is a travel-driven giallo, moving through hotels, city streets, and tourist locations instead of a single, confined setting. The mystery builds through financial motive, false identities, and shifting alliances. The pacing favors constant movement, new cities, new clues, new danger, giving it more of an international thriller feel than a chamber mystery. Murders are staged with classic genre style, but the real hook is the insurance puzzle at the center of the plot. It's a globe-trotting giallo built on greed and misdirection, fast, layered, and clue-heavy. The Night God Screamed, 1971. If you are looking for a deep-cut example of the early 70s satanic panic subgenre, this film is a fascinating, if undeniably rough, relic. The story follows a charismatic, self-proclaimed preacher and his followers who descend upon a small, isolated town to establish a new religious order. What begins as a seemingly benign community project quickly devolves into a nightmare of ritualistic violence and fanatical obsession. It's a quintessential product of its era, capturing the widespread cultural anxiety regarding the rise of cults and the perceived fragility of traditional American values. What makes this film noteworthy and admittedly divisive is its commitment to a gritty, borderline grindhouse aesthetic. Director Lee Madden doesn't shy away from the nastier implications of the script. The film is dripping with a sense of moral decay and creeping hopelessness. While it certainly lacks the big-budget polish of more mainstream horror, it makes up for it with a raw, amateurish intensity that makes the proceedings feel strangely unpredictable. The performances, particularly from Jean Crane as a woman caught in the middle of this religious fervor, add a necessary layer of grounded desperation to the escalating madness. Ultimately, The Night God Screamed is a film defined by its atmosphere of dread and its cynical worldview. It is not interested in providing a comforting resolution, nor is it concerned with traditional cinematic pacing. Instead, it offers a stark, unfiltered look at the dark side of human belief and the ease with which a community can succumb to collective insanity. For those who enjoy video nasty era discovery and are willing to look past a few rough edges, this is a compelling piece of cult cinema that serves as a grim time capsule of 1971's darker cultural anxieties. Zaat, 1971. Few films embody the sheer, unfiltered audacity of regional exploitation cinema quite like Zaat. Directed by Don Barton, this bizarre creature feature follows a mad scientist, who happens to be a former Nazi, naturally, as he uses a mysterious substance to transform himself into a humanoid, gill-man monster to exact vengeance on the world. It is a film that exists entirely on its own wavelength, unburdened by the conventions of logic, pacing, or even consistent sound design. It is the ultimate weekend project movie, where the ambition of the concept vastly outstrips the resources on hand, creating a viewing experience that is as endearing as it is undeniably rough. What makes Zaat, also known as the Bloodwaters of Dr. Z, a legendary fixture in the bad movie circuit, is the monster suit itself. It is a gloriously, hilariously tactile creation that looks like it was assembled from leftover rubber and ambition, yet it is filmed with such earnest intensity that you can't help but admire the audacity. Unlike the polished, studio-backed horror of the era, Zaat feels like a fever dream, born out of a humid Florida swamp. It is repetitive, frequently nonsensical, and deeply hypnotic in its incompetence. While it is impossible to recommend this to anyone looking for a good film, it is a mandatory watch for any student of the grindhouse era. It captures the spirit of the late-night monster movie broadcast, the kind of film that feels like it was unearthed from a dusty basement rather than produced on a set. It's an exercise in pure, unrefined genre love, and for those who enjoy the charming, clunky history of low-budget horror, it is an essential slice of 1971 weirdness that simply cannot be replicated. Willard, 1971. Few films from the early 70s capture the pathetic, creeping dread of social ostracization quite like Daniel Mann's Willard. It tells the story of an insecure, bullied young man who, feeling utterly rejected by his demanding boss and suffocated by his domineering mother, finds an unusual outlet for his rage. He begins training a colony of rats to do his bidding. It is a quintessential revenge of the underdog tale, where the protagonist's descent into sociopathy is framed not just as a breakdown, but as a chilling, inevitable response to a world that has treated him with nothing but contempt. What makes Willard such a standout in the horror canon is Bruce Davison's transformative performance. He plays Willard Stiles with a nervous, twitchy fragility that makes the audience's shifting sympathy toward him feel deeply uncomfortable. As the rats, most notably the ringleaders Socrates and Ben, begin to take on distinct personalities, the film moves from a character study into a genuine creature feature nightmare. The practical effects, utilizing thousands of trained rats, lend a tactile, swarming intensity to the film that no amount of modern CGI could replicate. There is an undeniable, visceral ick factor that lingers long after the credits roll. The film serves as a grim reflection of the era's anxieties regarding loneliness and the potential for violence in the quiet ones. It's a slow-burn narrative that doesn't rely on jump scares, but rather on the steadily mounting tension of watching a human being dissolve into madness. It's a sad, cruel, and deeply effective piece of horror that manages to make the viewer feel for both the monster and the man. For anyone interested in the foundational creature feature of the 1970s that favors psychological decay over pure splatter, Willard remains an essential, haunting watch. Let's Scare Jessica to Death, 1971. Some horror films rely on monsters, blood, or loud jump scares. Let's Scare Jessica to Death isn't one of them. Instead, it creeps under your skin slowly, leaving you unsure of what's real and what's imagined. The movie follows Jessica, played brilliantly by Zora Lampert, who moves with her husband to a quiet farmhouse in the countryside. She's just come out of a stay in a psychiatric hospital, and this new life is supposed to be a fresh start. But almost immediately, Jessica begins hearing whispers, seeing things she can't explain, and feeling like something or someone is watching her. Soon she crosses paths with a strange young woman who may not be who she seems. Is this newcomer a ghost, a vampire, or just another trick of Jessica's fragile mind? That's the unsettling tension that drives the entire film. What makes Let's Scare Jessica to Death so powerful isn't big flashy scares. It's the atmosphere. The farmhouse and its surroundings are shot in this eerie, dreamlike way where even silence feels threatening. The soundtrack, filled with hushed voices and strange noises, only makes you feel more trapped in Jessica's unraveling world. At its core, the film is about the fear of losing control of your own mind. The horror doesn't come from an external monster, but from not knowing whether what you're experiencing is real. Lampert's performance nails this. Her fragile, haunted presence keeps you hooked and unsettled from start to finish. By the time the credits roll, the film doesn't give you easy answers. Instead, it leaves you with a lingering unease, the kind that sticks with you long after. Let's Scare Jessica to Death is one of those quiet horror gems that proves you don't need buckets of gore to terrify. All it takes is mood, paranoia, and the terrifying possibility that the real horror is in your own head. The Corpse Grinders, 1971. At the Lotus Cat Food Company, business is booming, mostly because the owners have discovered a secret ingredient that keeps the local felines hungry for more. As the local graveyard becomes a primary resource for the factory's meat supply, the city's pet population begins to undergo a predatory shift. The cats aren't just domesticated anymore. They are hunters. When the factory's dark, gruesome supply chain is finally exposed, the owners realize they have created a hunger in their own pets that can no longer be satisfied by commercial feed. Director Ted V. Michaels treats this premise with a baffling, deadpan sincerity. He doesn't lean into the comedy. He plays the story straight, which makes the sight of a cat leaping at a throat seem even more jarring. The cast delivers lines with a strange, wooden detachment that feels like they're reading from a teleprompter in another room. It's an exercise in pure, low-budget desperation, where every frame feels like it was filmed on a shoestring budget in the back of an industrial warehouse. Technically, the film is a masterclass in the shabby chic of the 1970s exploitation scene. The lighting is harsh, the gore is bright red paint, and the beast attacks are clearly puppets and snarling house cats being tossed at actors. Yet, there is a weird, hypnotic energy to the chaos. The film doesn't care about internal consistency or character arcs. It only cares about the next moment someone gets dragged into the grinder. This is a quintessential drive-in curiosity. It is a film that defies critical appraisal because it operates on an entirely different frequency than good cinema. It serves as a stark reminder of the wild, uncurated era of exploitation, where any idea, no matter how repulsive or ridiculous, could find its way to a screen if it promised enough shocks. Lust for a Vampire, 1971. Count Karnstein and his wife perform a blood-soaked ritual in the ruins of their ancestral home to bring their daughter Carmilla back from the dead. Once resurrected, Carmilla doesn't head for a remote tomb. She enrolls in a high-end finishing school for young women. There, the vampire plague moves from the shadows into the classroom as Carmilla begins systematically feeding on both students and staff. A visiting writer finds himself hopelessly entangled with her, ignoring the rising death toll in a daze of obsession that blinds him to the monster standing right in front of him. Director Jimmy Sangster had the unenviable task of following up the successful The Vampire Lovers with a rushed production. Jutta Stensgaard steps into the role of Carmilla, shifting the character from Ingrid Pitt's menacing, predatory elegance to a more traditional, soft-focus, erotic lead. It is a film that wears its intentions on its sleeve. Where previous Hammer entries used lesbian subtext as a stylistic layer, Lust for a Vampire strips away the layers to make the eroticism the main event. The production values remain classically Hammer: sumptuous period costumes, rich color palettes, and damp, fog-choked forests. But the narrative coherence is noticeably absent. The film is often remembered today for its jarring musical choices and its clumsy attempts to graft a Gothic vampire hunt onto a 1970s softcore template. It is quite literally a vampire film trying to find its heart, only to get lost in its own desire for exploitation. Ultimately, Lust for a Vampire serves as a fascinating, if flawed, look at a studio in transition. It is the moment where the Gothic and the grindhouse collided. Not always successfully, but certainly memorably. For the Hammer completist, it's a necessary piece of the puzzle, a reminder that even the most prestigious horror studio had to wrestle with the changing tastes of a new, more permissive decade. What's the Matter with Helen? 1971. Few films from the early 1970s tap into the hag horror or psycho-biddy subgenre with as much melancholy and theatrical flair as Curtis Harrington's What's the Matter with Helen? Set in 1930s, the story follows two women, played by Debbie Reynolds and Shelley Winters, who relocate to California to escape the infamy surrounding their son's involvement in a gruesome murder case. What begins as a desperate bid for a fresh start quickly dissolves into a claustrophobic portrait of religious obsession, crushing isolation, and the disintegration of identity as the past begins to intrude on their fragile new lives. What makes this film particularly effective is how it weaponizes nostalgia. Harrington, a director with a deep love for the artifice of old Hollywood, crafts a setting that feels like a brightly lit Technicolor trap. The cheery, bustling dance academy where the women work acts as a sharp, jarring contrast to the dark, mounting paranoia simmering in their shared home. Shelley Winters delivers a deeply unsettled, almost painful performance as a woman who clings to her new religious fervor as a way to sanitize her guilt, while Debbie Reynolds provides a grounded, increasingly desperate foil. The film isn't trying to deliver the jump-scare thrills of the era's slashers. Instead, it offers a slow, agonizing slide into madness. It's a sophisticated, character-driven piece of suspense that understands how the weight of one's secrets can be more terrifying than any supernatural monster. For those who appreciate the theatrical, high-tension psychodramas of the 1970s, What's the Matter with Helen is a masterful study in how the pursuit of redemption can be the very thing that drives you to your doom.
That's it for tonight's episode. If you want to help us keep the archive alive and growing, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tap the bell. And remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is somebody's favorite.